On the morning of my husband's funeral, I walked into the church thinking the worst moment of my life had already happened the day he took his last breath. I was wrong. The real betrayal was waiting for me in the first row of pews, where dignity was supposed to live, where respect was supposed to remain untouched, even in grief. My steps echoed on the cold marble floor as I moved closer, clutching the folded program in my hands, my palms sweating through the paper. The choir sang softly, their voices rising like smoke into the tall ceiling, but none of it touched me, because all I could see was her, a woman in a black dress. A black veil pulled dramatically over her face, sitting where only family belonged. Her back was straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, and on her finger glistened a ring I had never seen before. She sat not alone, not hidden in shame, but right next to my son, my own flesh and blood, who leaned toward her with the kind of protectiveness he used to show only to me. I stopped walking. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there, onto the polished floor, in front of all the mourners who had come to pay their respects. My son, my only child, had chosen to sit beside the woman who had destroyed my marriage long before death ended it. He didn't look at me. He didn't rise to help his mother find her seat. His gaze was fixed on her, the mistress, the woman my husband had whispered to in secret while I cooked his meals and washed his clothes, the woman who had stolen not only his body but now his legacy. And in that instant I realized the betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just my husband who had broken his vows. My son had, in some twisted way, chosen her over me. The air felt suddenly thin, as if the church walls had closed in. My knees trembled. And I gripped the pew for balance, forcing myself not to collapse in front of them, not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. The priest cleared his throat from the altar, inviting everyone to sit, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted in disbelief. How dare she sit there? How dare he allow it? The first row, where I was supposed to sit as the widow, where my son was supposed to hold my hand in comfort, was now their throne of shamelessness. Around me, whispers began to ripple through the congregation. People noticed. People always notice. Yet no one moved to correct the insult. No one rose to say, "That place belongs to the wife." And my son, my only boy, stayed frozen beside her, his arm brushing against hers, his face set in defiance, as if daring me to challenge the scene. I forced myself to walk forward, every step heavier than the last. My heels clicked against the marble, echoing like the beat of a war drum. I took a seat in the second row, a place reserved for distant cousins or acquaintances. Not for the widow. Not for the woman who had given 28 years of her life to the man lying in that coffin. I sat there trembling, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth might break. My eyes burned with tears. But I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of her. Not in front of my son, who had made his choice. The priest began to speak of my husband's life, reading from a script that sounded more like a resume than a eulogy. A devoted father, a respected businessman, a man of faith, he said, and each word stabbed me like a lie. Devoted father? My son sat beside a stranger, not his mother. Respected businessman? His business was built on secrets and shadowed meetings. A man of faith? Then why had he desecrated the sanctity of our marriage bed? My hands shook in my lap, nails biting into my palms, as if the pain might keep me grounded. And then, as if the universe wanted to slice me open a little deeper, my son reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He whispered something to the woman beside him, and she gave a subtle nod, her veil tilting slightly as if in approval. He rose. My boy, my child, walked past me without a glance and stepped up to the altar. He unfolded the paper with steady hands and began to speak. His voice was strong, clear, rehearsed. Today I want to share not just the story of a father, but the truth about a man many of you did not know. A man who was unfairly judged in his final years. A man who found real happiness, real love. His eyes slid toward her. The mistress. And the church gasped, a collective intake of breath that rolled like thunder against the high ceiling. I felt my heart crack open. Real love? Was I not real? Were 28 years of loyalty and sacrifice nothing more than a shadow compared to her cheap perfume and stolen hours? I stared at him, at my son, as if he were a stranger. In that moment, I realized he had been lost to me long before this day, long before this funeral. She had taken my husband, but she had also taken my son. The betrayal was complete. I looked down at my lap, unable to bear the sight of their smug triumph. That was when I noticed something strange. As my son spoke of true happiness and new beginnings, one of the pallbearers discreetly placed a small envelope on the pew beside me. He didn't look at me, just slid it there and walked away. My pulse quickened. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The envelope was unsealed, and inside was a folded sheet of paper, creased and yellowed like it had been handled too many times. I glanced around to see if anyone was watching, but all eyes were on my son, who was now praising the woman who had destroyed our family. I opened the letter slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my husband's handwriting. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. If you are reading this, then my lies have caught up with me. I never stopped loving you, but I was weak. She tempted me, and I fell. Forgive me. Protect our legacy. Do not trust appearances. My hands shook violently, the paper rattling between my fingers. Legacy? What legacy? What had he hidden? Why was this letter here, slipped to me like contraband in a sacred place? I folded the paper quickly and slid it back into the envelope, tucking it deep into my purse. My heart pounded so loud I thought the whole church could hear it. I looked at my son, standing there, lying to everyone with his speech, and I knew something he didn't, something that might change everything. But was I strong enough to face it? Was I brave enough to fight back even now when my own blood had betrayed me? As the congregation applauded my son's words and the mistress dabbed her eyes with a black lace handkerchief, I sat frozen in the second row, clutching the secret to my chest. My husband had left me more than just grief. He had left me a weapon. And as I looked up at the coffin, I felt a strange, dangerous fire ignite inside me. The funeral was no longer just a farewell. It was the beginning of a battle. I have to confess something. The truth is, the shock of seeing my son sitting beside her at the funeral wasn't the first time I had felt betrayal in my own house. It was just the moment when everything finally came into focus, when all the shadows I had ignored gathered in one place and showed their true face. Looking back now, I realized the signs were always there. Tucked into corners I pretended not to see, whispered in late-night phone calls I forced myself to ignore. The funeral was the explosion, but the cracks had been spreading through my life for years. I remember one night, maybe 2 years ago. My husband had been working late again, or so he said. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl because you know it's hiding something. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I heard his phone buzz on the counter. He never left it out like that. Normally, he kept it in his pocket, guarded like a secret. I dried my hands quickly and glanced at the screen. Just a name I didn't recognize. Lydia. The message preview was short but sharp, like a blade pressed against my throat. I miss you. Call me when she's asleep. My whole body went cold. For a second, I thought I might drop the plate in my hand, let it shatter on the tile just to drown out the sound of my racing heart. But I set it down gently, carefully, like a woman walking across thin ice. I could have opened the message. I could have scrolled through his phone, hunted for the truth right there. But instead, I did something far more pathetic. I put the phone down exactly where it had been, screen facing up, as if I hadn't touched it at all. When he came home later that night, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual, I asked nothing. I smiled, I pretended, because part of me didn't want confirmation. Part of me wanted to keep living in the illusion that our marriage was still whole. But deep down, I knew. I knew when he came home late and went straight to the shower, avoiding my eyes. I knew when he started sleeping on the far edge of the bed, his back to me, the gulf between us growing wider than any ocean. And I knew most painfully the day I caught him standing in the garage, speaking in a low, urgent tone on the phone. I had walked in quietly carrying a basket of laundry and heard him say words that froze my blood. "She suspects nothing. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of. That phrase haunted me. Who was he talking to? And why did his voice sound almost tender? I dropped the basket louder than I meant to, and he spun around, his face pale. He hung up quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Work call," he said, grabbing a towel to wipe his forehead though he hadn't been sweating. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but instead I nodded and carried the laundry upstairs. Because I was afraid that if I ripped off the mask, I'd find nothing underneath but betrayal. And then came my son. My beautiful boy, the one I had raised with bedtime stories and packed lunches, the one I had sat with through piano lessons and soccer games. I noticed him starting to change. He stopped confiding in me. He grew distant, irritable, defensive whenever I asked simple questions. "Where are you going?" I'd ask, and he'd snap, "Out! Don't worry about it." Once I overheard him on the phone late at night, his voice low but urgent. "She can't know, just let me handle it." I thought he was talking about me, his mother. My heart twisted. My own son keeping secrets from me. The worst memory, the one that still stings like salt in an open wound, happened one rainy evening. I had been cooking dinner, the smell of garlic and onions filling the kitchen, when I noticed his jacket tossed carelessly on the chair. I reached into the pocket to hang it up properly and found a crumpled receipt. A restaurant bill, 2 entrees, 1 bottle of expensive wine. The name of the restaurant burned into my mind. It was the same place my husband had once taken me for our anniversary, a place that had felt sacred to us. And the date on the receipt? The same night he had told me he was working late. I waited until my son came downstairs, the jacket slung over his arm. "Where were you last night?" I asked, my voice calm but heavy. He froze, his eyes darting just for a second, then shrugged. "Out with friends." I held up the receipt. His face hardened instantly, his jaw tight. "Stop snooping, Mom," he snapped, snatching it from my hand. "You don't need to know everything." I stood there in shock, unable to breathe. He had defended him. He had protected his father's lie. And in that moment, I saw it. The loyalty had shifted. My son was no longer mine. He belonged to his father. Or worse, to her. That was the first real wound. The night I realized I was alone in my own family. The mistress had already taken my husband's heart, but she was reaching for my son too, pulling him into her web with whispered promises and twisted justifications, and I let it happen. I swallowed my suspicions, buried my pain, and told myself families go through rough patches. I lied to myself because the truth was unbearable. But now, sitting in that second row at the funeral, watching my son lean protectively toward her, I understood. Every receipt, every message, every cold shoulder had been leading here, to this moment, to my humiliation in front of the entire congregation. And I couldn't help but ask myself, had my son ever truly been mine? Or had he been hers all along, hidden behind a mask of innocence until now? As the priest droned on about forgiveness and eternal rest, my mind slipped back into those nights of quiet suspicion. Every moment I had looked the other way. I had been blind, willfully blind. And now, here was the price. I stared at their hands resting so close together, at the way my son whispered something to her, and she smiled faintly behind her veil. The rage inside me was so sharp, I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. My husband's betrayal had been one thing, but my son's? That was the wound that threatened to end me. Yet somewhere deep inside, as the choir's hymn swelled around me, I felt a spark. A small, dangerous spark that whispered, "It's not over. You're not finished yet." After the funeral mass ended, the crowd spilled into the reception hall where long tables were lined with coffee urns, tea, and trays of cookies. People murmured in hushed voices, offering me handshakes, awkward hugs, and empty condolences. Their words washed over me like cold rain, phrases I barely heard because my eyes kept drifting to that corner of the room where she stood with my son, smiling faintly, whispering into his ear as though she were the true widow. I clutched the strap of my purse where the letter from my husband was hidden, my knuckles white. The betrayal pulsed in me like a second heartbeat, and I knew if I stared at them any longer, I would burst. I turned away, searching for air, when I felt a light touch on my arm. I looked up and saw an old friend I hadn't expected, Mark, my husband's former business partner. His face was grave, his eyes searching mine as though he wanted to speak but wasn't sure if he should. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said softly, but then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "We should talk. Not here, later." My pulse quickened. "Talk about what?" I whispered back. His lips pressed into a thin line, and he gave a subtle shake of his head. "Not here. Just be careful who you trust." And then he stepped back, disappearing into the crowd before I could press him further. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. What did he know? And why did he look at me with such pity? The reception dragged on. The mistress floated from group to group, receiving sympathy as though she had earned the right, while my son stayed glued to her side. Every time I caught his eyes, he looked away. The sting of it cut deeper than any knife. I tried to avoid them, retreating to the far end of the hall near a window that looked out onto the cemetery. That was when Mark appeared again, motioning for me to step outside. We walked into the cool air, away from the buzz of conversation. The wind tugged at my black veil as I turned to him. "Tell me," I said firmly. "Whatever it is, I need to know." He hesitated, glancing back toward the hall. Then he sighed, shoulders heavy, as though he carried a burden too long. "Your husband," he began slowly, "wasn't just unfaithful in love. He was unfaithful in business, too. And she," his eyes darkened, "was part of it." I felt my breath catch. "What do you mean?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket, his hands trembling slightly as he handed it to me. It was a photocopy of a bank statement, numbers lined across the page in black ink. My husband's name was there, but so was hers, a joint account, money flowing in and out, thousands at a time, over months. "He told me once it was for consulting," Mark said bitterly. "But when I started asking questions, he cut me out of the company. I didn't have proof until now. She wasn't just his mistress. She was his partner, in everything." The paper blurred as I stared at it, the numbers swimming before my eyes. A joint account. Business dealings. My stomach turned. It wasn't just my marriage he had betrayed. He had entwined our fortune, our family's security, with her. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice cracking. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Because you deserve to know, and because I think they're planning something. Your son. I've seen him with her at the office. He's been signing papers. I don't know the details, but it didn't feel right." My knees buckled slightly, and I gripped the railing of the steps outside the hall to steady myself. My son. Signing papers. My mind flashed back to the receipt, the coldness in his voice, the way he had defended his father's lies. Now it all made sense. He wasn't just protecting his father. He was aligning himself with her. He was part of it. The mistress wasn't simply stealing my husband, she was preparing to steal everything, and my son was helping her. A wave of nausea rose in me. "Do you have proof?" I whispered. Mark shook his head, frustration etched on his face. "Not yet, but there's more. Your husband transferred shares of the company months ago, quietly. Guess whose name is on the documents?" He didn't have to say it, I already knew. "Hers," I breathed. He nodded grimly. "Yes, and if she gets control of the estate through your son, everything you built together, your home, your security, will be gone." The world tilted around me. I thought of the letter in my purse. My husband's shaky handwriting warning me not to trust appearances. Legacy. Protect our legacy. Now the meaning became terrifyingly clear. He had left me breadcrumbs, not apologies, warnings. Proof that the woman in black wasn't just a shameful secret. She was a predator, waiting to devour everything. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, but the images stormed through me. My son at her side, nodding as she whispered into his ear, their hands brushing as if in conspiracy, the way he had stood at the altar praising real love, rewriting history in her favor. And now I saw it wasn't just emotional betrayal, it was financial, legal. A coup planned in silence while I cooked dinners and folded laundry, believing I was still the heart of my family. Mark's voice pulled me back. "You have to be careful. They're powerful together. She knows how to manipulate, and he..." He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "He's young. He thinks she's the key to his future. He doesn't see the trap." His eyes softened, filled with pity I didn't want. "But you still have time. Find out what your husband left you. Don't let them corner you." I swallowed hard, gripping the bank statement like a lifeline. My husband's letter burned in my purse, now sharper, clearer. He had been weak, yes, but he had known she was dangerous. He had left me this fight, and I hated him for it, but I also knew I had no choice. My son was gone, pulled into her orbit. If I didn't act, I would lose everything. When we returned inside, the reception was winding down. People gathered coats, exchanged polite words. My son was still by her side, his hand resting lightly on her back as though guiding her, protecting her. My heart twisted. He should have been guiding me. He should have been my strength. Instead, he was shielding the woman who had taken his father from me. I stood in the doorway watching them laugh softly with a group of relatives, their heads bent together like conspirators, and for the first time that day, the grief inside me began to harden into something else, something colder, something sharper. I walked past them without a word, my head held high though my legs shook beneath me. I felt their eyes on my back, but I didn't turn. I couldn't, because if I did, I might scream. And if I screamed, the whole room would know the truth, that the widow was not just mourning her husband, she was mourning her son too. And beneath that grief, a storm was building, a storm that would not stop until the truth was dragged into the light. I thought the worst had already passed when Mark handed me the bank statement, when I realized the mistress wasn't just stealing love, but plotting to steal the foundation of my life. But nothing prepared me for the next blow, the kind that doesn't come in whispers or secret documents, but in laughter, in ridicule, in the open cruelty of people you once called family. The reception hall was nearly emptying, but a few clusters of relatives remained near the tables, sipping coffee, nibbling at cookies, talking in hushed voices that always seemed to grow louder when I walked by. I felt their eyes following me, their murmurs heavy with judgment. Some didn't bother to lower their voices at all. "She looks so frail," one of my husband's cousins said, shaking her head. "No wonder he strayed." Another chimed in with a bitter laugh. "And to think she'll still expect to keep the house. Doesn't she realize he left everything to his son?" Their words cut deep. Not because I hadn't heard such gossip before, but because they said it without shame, without fear, as if I were invisible. I tried to walk past them, my head high, but the sting of their whispers clung to me like smoke. That was when I heard a louder laugh, sharper, crueler. I turned and saw my sister-in-law, Margaret, standing with a glass of wine in her hand, her face flushed with the satisfaction of a woman who believed she was finally winning. She tilted her glass toward the mistress, who stood beside my son, smiling faintly behind her veil. "Well," Margaret said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "at least he died happy. Better to spend his last days with someone who still knew how to make him feel alive, rather than with—" Her eyes locked on me, and her lips curled into a sneer. "A woman who clings to the past like it's all she has." Laughter rippled through the group. My son didn't stop it. He didn't defend me. He just stood there, his hand resting lightly on the mistress's arm, his eyes cold as they met mine. That was the moment I felt the ground beneath me crumble. My son, my only child, allowed them to mock me, to strip me of dignity in the very room where his father's coffin lay. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to beg him to remember who I was, who I had been for him. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. The words lodged in my throat, drowned by the weight of humiliation. I turned to leave, but Margaret's voice chased me. Running away again. That's what she always does. She never had the strength to face the truth. I stopped, my hand gripping the edge of a chair to keep from collapsing. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I turned slowly, meeting her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't look away. "The truth," I said quietly, my voice trembling but clear, "has a way of coming out, and when it does, it burns everything in its path." The room fell silent for a moment. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Margaret's smile faltered, but only for a second. Then she waved her hand dismissively, turning back to her wine. "Empty threats," she muttered. "She has nothing." My son's jaw tightened, and he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "That's enough, Mother," he said, not to Margaret, but to me. His words landed like a knife in my chest. He had called her family. He had chosen her side. I stared at him, my heart shattering in slow motion. "Enough?" I whispered. "Do you even hear yourself? Do you understand what you're saying?" He crossed his arms, his eyes filled with a defiance that felt foreign, like I was staring at a stranger. "You're embarrassing yourself," he said coldly, "and you're embarrassing me." The murmurs swelled again, people shaking their heads, some smirking, some whispering into their cups. I felt the walls closing in, the judgment pressing down on me like a weight I could no longer carry. My knees weakened, and I stumbled back into a chair, the room spinning. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heartbeat race out of control. For a moment, I thought I might faint. It was then I noticed the mistress leaning close to my son, whispering something into his ear. He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on me. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. Her smile said it all. She had won. She had turned my son against me, and now she wanted me to see it, to feel it, to break under the weight of it. I forced myself to stand again, my legs trembling. I walked past them without a word, my purse clutched tightly to my chest, where the letter still lay hidden. The hall felt suffocating, the walls pressing in, the air too heavy to breathe. I pushed open the door and stepped outside into the cold evening air, gasping as though I had been underwater. The sky was streaked with gray clouds, the cemetery darkening as the sun slipped below the horizon. I walked among the graves, the silence of the dead offering more comfort than the living ever could. My tears finally spilled, hot and relentless, sliding down my cheeks as I clutched the purse tighter. My son's voice echoed in my head. "You're embarrassing me." Words I never thought I would hear from him. Words that cut deeper than any betrayal from his father ever could. I sank onto a bench near the far edge of the cemetery, my shoulders shaking. The humiliation replayed in my mind, the laughter, the whispers, the sneers. I thought of the years I had given them all, the dinners I had cooked, the holidays I had hosted, the sacrifices I had made, and this was my reward, to be mocked, discarded, erased. But as the night wind cooled my face, another thought began to rise, a darker thought. Sharp and unyielding, they thought I had nothing. They thought I was finished, but I had the letter. I had the bank statement, and perhaps, just perhaps, I still had more strength than they could imagine. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, staring at the horizon where the last light faded. They had pushed me to the edge, humiliated me before the world, but I would not fall. Not yet, because the truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and I would not rest until it burned them all. The cemetery grew darker as the reception hall emptied behind me. Guests drove away in black cars, their headlights sweeping across the gravestones like fleeting ghosts. I stayed on the bench, my purse pressed against my chest, listening to the wind whistle through the bare trees. My body felt hollow, as if the laughter, the whispers, and my own son's words had drained every ounce of strength from me. I told myself I should go home, but my legs wouldn't move. Something inside me kept me rooted there, waiting, though I didn't yet know for what. I saw them before they saw me. My son and the mistress stepped out of the side door of the hall. Walking close together, their voices low but urgent. They didn't look around. They didn't notice me in the shadows near the far end of the cemetery. I froze, holding my breath, as their words carried faintly through the cold air. "The lawyer will confirm it tomorrow," she was saying, her tone smooth, practiced. "Your father transferred the shares months ago. Everything will pass to you, and with me by your side, no one can challenge it." My son's voice followed, hesitant but firm. "What about her? My mother? She won't just sit back." A small, cruel laugh escaped the mistress. "She has no power. She's weak. Look at her today, crying, stumbling, embarrassing herself. No one takes her seriously. By the time she even realizes what's happening, it'll all be done. The company, the house, the accounts, they'll be ours." Ours. The word slammed into me like a hammer. Not his, not hers, theirs, together. I gripped the edge of the bench so tightly my knuckles turned white. My son didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just nodded, his silhouette stiff against the dim light of the parking lot. "I just don't want trouble," he muttered. "She'll cause a scene." The mistress touched his arm gently, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Let her scream. Let her cry. It only makes her look crazier. And when people see how unstable she is, it'll be even easier to push her aside legally. Trust me, I've handled worse." Her confidence, her certainty, cut through me like a blade. I wanted to run at them, to scream until my voice shattered, to slap that smug veil off her face. But my feet remained planted in the shadows, my body trembling with a mixture of fury and despair. I felt like I was watching my own funeral, except I was still alive, forced to witness my son bury me with his silence. They walked further down the path, stopping near a cluster of trees. My son pulled out his phone, the glow of the screen lighting his face. "Should I call the lawyer tonight?" he asked. "Just to make sure everything is in order?" She leaned closer, her lips near his ear. "Yes, the sooner the better. I want every paper signed, every transfer complete. I've waited long enough, and once it's done, we'll be free. Free from her. Free from the past." My stomach twisted violently. Free from me. I wasn't just being replaced. I was being erased. The wind shifted, carrying their voices even clearer now. "What if she finds something?" my son asked. "My father kept things. Papers. I don't know what he might have left her." The mistress's tone turned sharp, commanding. "Then you make sure she doesn't find them. Search her house if you have to. She's sentimental. If he left anything, she'll keep it close. But don't worry. Even if she finds something, we'll have the advantage. We control the narrative. Everyone already thinks she's fragile, broken. No one will believe her over us. Tears blurred my vision, hot and unrelenting. They were planning not only to strip me of everything, but to paint me as insane, to twist my grief into weakness, to silence me completely. I pressed a hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud, my body shaking so violently I thought they might hear the bench creak beneath me. I watched as my son slipped his phone back into his pocket. He looked at her with a kind of devotion I had once dreamed he would show a future wife, the kind of devotion a mother longs to see in her child. But it wasn't love that bound him now. It was greed, manipulation, the poisoned legacy his father had left behind. They turned and walked toward the parking lot, their figures growing smaller with each step. I stayed frozen, my chest tight, until their car pulled away and the red taillights vanished into the night. Only then did I let myself collapse forward, my face buried in my hands, my sobs tearing through the silence of the cemetery. I don't know how long I stayed there, rocking back and forth on the bench, my body hollow, my soul shredded. Every part of me wanted to give up, to walk into the darkness and never return, to let them have it all because what was left of me without my husband, without my son, without dignity. The humiliation of the day pressed down on me like a grave, but then my hand brushed against the purse at my side and I remembered the letter. The shaky handwriting of a man who had betrayed me yet still left me a warning. Protect our legacy. The words pulsed in my mind, louder than my son's cruelty, sharper than the mistress's laughter. Protect, not surrender, not collapse. Protect. I pulled the envelope out with trembling hands, unfolding the paper under the weak glow of the cemetery lamp. I read the words again, slowly this time, as if they were oxygen. Do not trust appearances. I never stopped loving you. I was weak, but I wanted you to know the truth. The accounts, the shares, they are not what they seem. She will come for it all. Don't let her. The words ignited something inside me, something I thought had died with him, a spark of defiance, a memory of the woman I had once been before betrayal hollowed me out. I wiped my tears with shaking hands and lifted my head. The cemetery no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like a battlefield waiting for its war. I realized then that everything they had done to humiliate me, to crush me, had only planted the seed of their downfall. My son thought I was powerless. The mistress thought I was broken. The family thought I was a relic of the past. But I had something none of them expected. The truth, written in ink, carried in silence, waiting to be unleashed. I rose slowly from the bench, my legs still weak but steadier than before. I looked at the church, now dark and empty, and whispered into the night, "You think you've buried me, but you have no idea what's coming." I walked home from the cemetery that night with the letter pressed against my heart like a talisman, though every step felt heavier than the last. The city lights flickered through my tears, blurring into streaks of gold and white. I should have collapsed into bed, but I couldn't sleep. Not with my husband's words echoing in my head, not with the sound of the mistress's laughter still cutting through me, not with my son's cold voice declaring me an embarrassment. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, the letter unfolded before me, my coffee growing cold in its cup. Over and over I read those lines, "Protect our legacy. Do not trust appearances." By morning, something inside me had shifted. I was still broken, yes, but there was steel beneath the cracks now. I no longer wanted to simply survive their cruelty. I wanted to know the truth, every dark piece of it. I wanted to turn their own secrets into weapons. I started with the one person I thought might still stand by me. Mark. I dialed his number with trembling hands. He answered quickly, his voice low. "I was expecting your call," he said. We met that afternoon in a small cafe on the edge of town, far from the whispers of the funeral crowd. The rain tapped softly against the windows as we sat across from each other, the smell of coffee thick between us. I slid the letter across the table, watching his eyes widen as he read. "He left you this?" Mark asked, his voice almost reverent. I nodded, my fingers twisting in my lap. I don't know what he meant by legacy, but he knew something she doesn't want me to find. Mark leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I told you yesterday there were transfers, quiet ones, hidden from the board. But if this letter is right, then there may be accounts she hasn't touched yet. Assets your husband protected without her knowing." The possibility lit a spark in me. "How do we find them?" I whispered. Mark tapped the paper. "We start with his lawyer. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak, it's James." James. The name struck me like a bell. He had been my husband's lawyer for years, a discreet man with a calm smile who rarely spoke at family gatherings. I hadn't thought of him in months, but now he might be the key. Mark made the call, arranging a private meeting. Hours later, I found myself sitting in James's office, a dark-paneled room lined with shelves of thick leather books. James adjusted his glasses as he read the letter, his brow furrowing. "He must have written this in his final weeks," James said softly. "I warned him. I told him she couldn't be trusted, but he wouldn't listen until it was too late." I leaned forward, my voice raw. "He left me nothing in the will. My son and that woman, they think they've already won. But this letter, it has to mean something." James opened a drawer, pulling out a thick folder. "Your husband gave me instructions months ago. He said not to release them unless certain conditions were met. His death was one of them. The second was you asking the right question." He slid the folder across the desk. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were documents, copies of transfers, deeds, and a list of accounts I had never seen before. Offshore accounts, hidden properties, assets tucked away like jewels in the dark. Tears welled in my eyes as I flipped through the pages. He protected this from her?" James nodded. "Yes, he was weak in love, but not completely blind. He knew she wanted everything. He wanted you to have at least part of what he built." A sob tore from my throat, half grief, half relief. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than despair. I felt possibility. I clutched the folder to my chest, my pulse racing. But James's voice cut through my fragile hope. "Be careful. If she finds out you have this, she will stop at nothing. And your son—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "He's already under her influence. Don't expect him to protect you." I swallowed hard, nodding. "I know. He's already chosen her." That night, I spread the documents across my kitchen table like a general studying a battlefield. My hands traced the numbers, the properties, the hidden accounts. This was my shield, this was my sword. But as I stared at the evidence, a terrible truth struck me. If I used it, I wouldn't just be fighting her. I would be fighting my son, too. The thought nearly broke me again. Memories flooded back. My son as a little boy, running into my arms after school, pressing crayon drawings into my hands, whispering, "I love you, Mom," before bed. Where had that child gone? When had his heart hardened against me? The grief of losing him was sharper than losing my husband, but then I remembered the way he stood at the altar, praising the mistress, silencing me with cold eyes. That was not the boy I had raised. That was a stranger wearing his face. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "If I have to fight him to stop her, I will," I whispered into the empty room. My voice shook, but there was conviction in it now. I won't let them erase me. I won't let them erase the truth. The following days were a blur of whispered meetings with Mark and James, piecing together the puzzle of my husband's hidden legacy. Each new discovery hardened my resolve. A small cabin in the mountains, purchased in my name years ago but forgotten. A series of transfers to an account only I could access with the right key. My husband's letter wasn't just a confession, it was a map. But even as hope flickered, the danger grew. One night, as I returned home, I found my front door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I pushed it open cautiously, my heart hammering. The living room looked disturbed. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered. Someone had been searching. I rushed to the kitchen, to the place where I had hidden the folder. It was still there, but I knew immediately who had come. My son, or worse, her. I sank into a chair, clutching the folder to my chest. They knew. They suspected I had something, and if they were already breaking into my home, then the war had begun. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the shadows, waiting for the sound of footsteps that never came. The fear coiled tight in my chest, but beneath it burned something hotter. They had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, fragile, broken. But they had no idea how dangerous a woman becomes when she has nothing left to lose. By dawn, I knew the path ahead. I would no longer sit in silence. I would no longer hide. The documents, the letter, the truth, they would be my armor. They would be my weapon. My son might see me as an enemy now, but one day he would understand. Or perhaps he never would. Either way, I would not allow myself to be erased from the story of my own life. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, my face pale and lined with grief, but my eyes steady for the first time in weeks. You wanted me gone. I whispered to the night, to my husband, to my son, to her, but I'm still here, and I'm not finished. It happened 3 nights later, when I finally gathered the courage to face her. The documents, the letter, the whispers of Mark and James, they had armed me with knowledge, but knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed to look her in the eyes. I needed to hear the venom from her own mouth, to know just how deep her claws had sunk into my family. And perhaps, though I hated myself for it, I needed to see if there was any trace of humanity in the woman who had stolen everything from me. I found her where I knew she would be, in my husband's office, the one place that had once been his sanctuary and mine, the heart of the company he built. It was late evening when I walked in, the building nearly deserted, the corridors echoing with the sound of my heels. The receptionist gave me a nervous glance but didn't stop me. Maybe she knew better. Maybe she sensed what was about to unfold. When I pushed open the heavy oak door, she was there, standing behind my husband's old desk as if she owned it, her veil gone, her hair falling in polished waves over her shoulders. She was rifling through papers, her movements sharp and practiced. She didn't look up right away, but when she did, her eyes widened only for a moment before a slow, mocking smile curved her lips. "Well," she said softly, almost purring, "the ghost decides to walk among the living." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to step further into the room, the scent of leather and cigar smoke still lingering from my husband's days. "This isn't your place," I said, my voice low, trembling but steady enough to hold. She tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Isn't it? Your husband thought otherwise. He gave me the keys long before he gave you the truth." I clenched my fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. "You stole him from me. You poisoned my son against me. But I'm not here to cry about what I've lost. I'm here to warn you." That made her laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed through the office. "Warn me? You?" She leaned forward on the desk, her eyes glittering. "I already have everything. The company, the loyalty of his son, the respect of the board. What do you think you can possibly take from me now?" I pulled the letter from my purse, unfolding it slowly, deliberately. Her eyes flicked to the paper, her smile faltering just slightly. "He left me this," I said, my voice shaking with equal parts grief and fury. "A confession, Proof that he never trusted you, not completely. He hid things from you. Accounts, properties, assets you'll never touch. Her expression hardened, the amusement draining from her face. You're bluffing. I stepped closer, laying the letter on the desk between us. Read it. His words, not mine. He knew what you were. He knew you would come for everything, and he made sure you would never get it all. For the first time, I saw the mask slip. Her jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the page. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow now. So what? A letter scribbled by a dying man? No court will take it seriously. Your son won't believe you. No one will. I leaned in, my face inches from hers. My voice low and sharp as a blade. Maybe not, but I don't need them to believe me. I just need them to see you, the real you. The woman who mocked me at his funeral, the woman who whispered poison into my son's ear, the woman who thinks she can erase me from my own life. You underestimate me, and that will be your downfall. Her eyes blazed, her composure cracking. You think you can fight me? You're nothing without him. You never were. He told me everything, how weak you were, how pathetic. He stayed with you out of pity, not love. I gave him what you couldn't. The words struck like daggers, but I refused to flinch. I held her gaze, forcing steel into my voice. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I let him betray me because I was too afraid to face the truth. But weakness has a way of turning into strength when you have nothing left to lose. And I promise you this: you will regret underestimating me. For a moment, silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the ticking of the old clock on the wall, each second hammering the distance between who I had been and who I was becoming. Then she straightened, folding the letter with trembling fingers and sliding it back across the desk. "Keep your scraps," she hissed. "They won't save you. Your son is mine now. And when he stands against you, you'll have no one left." I took the letter, sliding it back into my purse with deliberate calm. "If he stands with you, then he will fall with you," I said quietly. "Blood doesn't excuse betrayal. One day he will see, and when he does, it will be too late for both of you." Her lips curled into a final smirk, but there was no laughter in her eyes now. She watched me as I turned to leave, my heels striking the floor with each step like the tolling of a bell. As I reached the door, I paused, glancing back just once. "This isn't over," I said. "This is only the beginning." I walked out into the night, my chest heaving, my hands trembling around the strap of my purse. The confrontation had left me raw, but also alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. She wanted me to believe I was powerless, but I had seen the flicker of fear in her eyes the moment her mask cracked. And I knew then that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing for war. The city lights blurred as I stepped onto the street, the letter pressing against my side, the documents waiting at home like weapons in the dark. She thought she had silenced me. She thought she had won. But the truth was burning inside me now, brighter than grief, sharper than humiliation. I whispered into the wind as I walked, a promise to myself, to my husband's ghost, to my son who had betrayed me. "You tried to bury me, but you forgot. I know how to rise." The day of the will reading arrived with a heaviness in the air that felt almost like thunder waiting to break. I dressed in black again, though this time the fabric felt less like mourning and more like armor. My hands trembled as I buttoned my coat, but not from fear, from anticipation. I carried my husband's letter and the folder James had prepared for me, tucked deep in my purse, their weight pulling at my shoulder like a secret ready to burst into daylight. The office of the probate court was crowded when I arrived. My son was already there, sitting confidently at the long, polished table with her by his side, her veil gone, replaced by a sharp suit and a smile that could slice glass. Around us sat a handful of relatives, curious, greedy, whispering behind their hands. At the head of the table, the lawyer cleared his throat, the stack of documents in front of him thick and intimidating. I took my seat quietly at the far end of the table. My son glanced at me, his expression unreadable, but he didn't speak. She, however, leaned forward slightly, her lips curving into that familiar smirk. "You came," she whispered across the distance, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "Good, I want you to watch." I ignored her, staring instead at the lawyer as he began. His voice was steady, rehearsed. "We are here to read the last will and testament of—" The words blurred as he spoke of legalities, of signatures and dates. I waited, my hands clenched in my lap until he began to outline the inheritance. "To my son," he read, "I leave majority ownership of the company, as well as all shares and interests therein. To my long-term companion—" His eyes flicked up briefly, then back to the page. "I leave certain personal effects and a discretionary trust." Gasps rippled around the room. She smiled wider, her hand brushing against my son's arm in a gesture of triumph. I sat still, my face calm, though my heart hammered in my chest. This was what they had expected, what they had built their confidence on. My son leaned back in his chair, smug, while she looked at me with open satisfaction. For them, this was victory sealed. But the lawyer wasn't finished. He cleared his throat again, shifting slightly in his chair. "However," he said, his voice lower now, "the deceased also left a sealed letter with instructions that it be delivered only if requested by his wife." The room stilled. All eyes turned to me. My pulse thundered in my ears as I reached into my purse, pulling out the worn envelope I had guarded like a lifeline. I slid it across the table. "I request it," I said simply, my voice steady. A murmur rippled through the relatives. My son's face paled slightly, his eyes darting to her. She stiffened, her smile faltering just for an instant before she recovered. The lawyer nodded, opening the envelope carefully. He read aloud, his voice filling the room with the words I had already memorized. "Protect our legacy. Do not trust appearances. She will come for everything. Do not let her." The silence that followed was deafening. My son shifted uncomfortably. She sat rigid, her eyes narrowed, her hand tightening around his. I took a breath, steadying myself, then reached for the folder James had given me. "I also have these," I said, laying the documents on the table with deliberate calm. "Hidden accounts, properties, transfers made without the board's knowledge, all in my husband's name, all protected from her reach." The lawyer's brows rose as he sifted through the pages, his expression hardening. "These are legitimate," he said finally. "Assets not accounted for in the will. By law, they pass to the spouse unless otherwise specified." Gasps filled the room again, louder this time. Relatives whispered frantically, their eyes darting between me and her. My son stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is absurd," he shouted. "She's making this up. Those papers, where did you even get them?" I rose too, my voice clear, sharp. "From the man your father trusted more than you trusted me. From his lawyer. From his hand, in his own writing. He left me the truth, and no matter how much you try to bury me, the truth has a way of rising." My son's face flushed red, his chest heaving. "You're destroying everything. He wanted me to have the company, not you. You're twisting this." I met his gaze, my heart breaking but my voice unflinching. "He wanted to protect what mattered. You think it was the company? The money? No, it was the legacy, the truth. And you've betrayed that legacy. You stood beside her and spit on everything he built." She finally rose, her composure cracking, her voice sharp as she pointed at me. "This is a trick. She's unstable. Everyone knows it. She embarrassed herself at the funeral. She's been hysterical for weeks. You can't believe her over us." But the lawyer spoke again, his voice calm and cold. "The documents are real. The handwriting matches. Unless challenged in court, these assets are hers by right." The room erupted into chaos. Relatives shouted, some siding with me, others whispering frantically to her. My son's face twisted in fury, his hand slamming onto the table. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back, whispering furiously into his ear. But I stood tall, my hand steady on the folder, my heart no longer trembling with grief, but burning with resolve. In that moment, I realized the power had shifted. For weeks, I had been the widow mocked, the mother discarded, the woman humiliated. But now, the truth was out, and they knew it. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers, my voice low but carrying across the room. You tried to erase me. You tried to turn my son against me. You thought you had already won, but you forgot one thing. I was his wife, the only one. And no matter how many lies you tell, that is a title you will never wear. The room fell silent again, the weight of my words settling like stone. She stared at me, her face pale, her smile gone. My son looked away, his shoulders slumping, shame flickering briefly in his eyes, though he said nothing. I gathered the papers calmly, sliding them back into my folder. "This is not the end," I said softly, almost to myself, but loud enough for them all to hear. "This is only the beginning." I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of their whispers chasing me down the corridor, but for the first time in weeks I felt tall. The war was far from over, but the battlefield no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. When I walked out of that room with the folder clutched against my chest, I thought perhaps the battle would stay contained within those walls, that it would remain a family wound, festering in private. But betrayal has a way of rotting in the open, and truth, once spoken aloud, spreads like fire. By the time I reached the street outside the probate office, I realized nothing would ever be private again. It started with the relatives. Some had been there in silence when I was mocked at the funeral, their eyes averted while I was humiliated. But once they saw the letter read aloud, once they heard the lawyer confirm the hidden assets were mine, something shifted. Their loyalty cracked. I caught whispers as I left the courthouse. "She was right all along," one cousin murmured. "We shouldn't have sided with her." Another shook his head, muttering, "Imagine trying to erase his own mother. Shameful." Those whispers grew louder. By evening, I received calls from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months. They had heard about the showdown from someone who had been present. The story had already begun to twist and spread like smoke in the wind. "We always knew you were the strong one," an elderly neighbor told me, her voice warm but pitying. "Don't let them win." Her words soothed and stung all at once, because strength was not what I felt. Not yet. The real turning point came 2 days later, when a local newspaper printed a column about the will reading. I don't know who leaked it. Perhaps a relative hungry for gossip. Perhaps a clerk with loose lips. But the headline screamed across the page, "Widow challenges mistress and son over hidden fortune." I stood frozen in the grocery store aisle, the paper trembling in my hands as strangers passed behind me, glancing at the front page. My humiliation, my private war, was now public spectacle. At first I wanted to run, to hide, to crawl back into the safety of silence. But then I remembered the mistress's voice at the funeral, mocking me, her words dripping with contempt. "She's weak. She has no power." And suddenly, the exposure felt less like shame and more like a weapon, because now people were watching. And the more they watched, the less power she had to control the story. By the end of the week, it wasn't just the paper. A neighbor stopped me on the street, his voice low. "I saw her," he whispered. "Your son's woman. She was at the bank last month, making withdrawals she shouldn't have been able to make." I thought it strange at the time, but now it makes sense. He handed me a crumpled receipt he had found near the teller line, bearing her signature. Proof, another piece of the puzzle. Witnesses were appearing everywhere, their small fragments of truth adding fuel to the fire. And then there was Mrs. Allen, a woman I had once considered nothing more than a casual acquaintance. She came to my door one evening, clutching her purse, her eyes darting nervously over her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, "but I used to work at the company. I overheard things. She paused, swallowing hard. "Your husband, he told her once, in front of me, that she would never truly have his heart, no matter how much money he gave her. He said you were the only one he trusted with the legacy." Her voice broke as she added, "I thought you should know." Her words filled me with a strange, bittersweet fire. The betrayal was still there, but so was the faint echo of loyalty, the reminder that despite his weakness, despite everything, he had seen me as more than the woman they mocked. The mistress must have felt the tide turning because her mask began to crack. I heard she snapped at relatives in public, calling them traitors, accusing them of siding with me. My son tried to silence the rumors, but even his voice no longer carried the weight it once had. People had seen too much. They had witnessed the showdown with their own eyes. They had read the letter, and whispers of abuse, manipulation, and greed clung to the mistress like smoke she couldn't wash away. It spread further than I ever imagined. A colleague from the church called me, her voice hesitant. "People are talking," she said gently. "They're saying you've been wronged for years, that you were strong to stand up at last." Strong. The word echoed through me. Strong was not what I felt, but maybe strength wasn't about feeling. Maybe it was about refusing to stay silent, even when silence was easier. By the end of that week, the story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the community, to every neighbor who whispered, to every relative who chose a side, to every stranger who glanced at me in the market with pity or admiration. My pain had become public, and though it burned to live under such scrutiny, I knew it was also my shield. Because once the fire spreads, once the witnesses multiply, you cannot be erased quietly anymore. I stood one evening on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold, and I realized they had tried to bury me in silence, but instead they had given me a chorus of voices. My story was no longer just my own, and with each whisper, each witness, each spark, the fire grew hotter, brighter, impossible to contain. The weeks after the will reading unfolded like a storm that refused to pass. What began as whispers and newspaper columns grew into a full-blown reckoning. The mistress, once so composed and smug, could no longer walk into a room without heads turning, without whispers trailing behind her like shadows. At first she tried to smile through it, pretending nothing had changed, but the cracks showed quickly. She snapped at store clerks, cursed at relatives, and more than once was seen storming out of restaurants where she had once been welcomed with open arms. Her downfall wasn't swift like a blade. It was slow, grinding, humiliating. Each day chipped away at the mask she wore. The bank receipts surfaced, neighbors whispered, former employees spoke of her manipulations. What she thought she had hidden so carefully was now public knowledge, dissected piece by piece. People no longer saw her as the grieving companion of a powerful man. They saw her for what she was, a vulture who had circled too close to the fire. And my son, my poor lost boy, he didn't escape the blaze either. At first, he tried to stand firm, to defend her, to dismiss the documents and the witnesses. But his words carried no weight anymore. He found himself alone at family gatherings. The cousins who once laughed with him now turning away. Friends stopped calling. Even colleagues at the company looked at him differently, whispers of the traitor's son following him down every hallway. The board grew restless. Investors withdrew support. The company that had been his pride was suddenly a crumbling tower. I should have felt triumphant watching it happen, and in a way I did. But triumph is a strange thing when it comes coated in grief. Because every time I saw my son's face pale with shame, Every time I heard of another door closing in his path, my heart twisted. This was the boy I had raised. The boy who once clung to my hand at school, who once told me I was his whole world. To watch him unravel was to watch a part of myself unravel too. Yet I knew, I had to know, that this was the price of betrayal. The mistress faced more than whispers. James, ever meticulous, pursued the legal threads my husband had left behind. Fraudulent transfers, misused accounts, forged signatures. Her hands were dirtier than even I had imagined. A court summons arrived within weeks, her name in bold letters. She tried to fight it, of course, claiming innocence, claiming victimhood, but the evidence stacked too high. She was forced to sit in the same kind of cold room where I had once been humiliated, this time as the accused. And the same people who once toasted her now watched her squirm. As for me, I returned to the house that had once felt like a tomb and began to breathe again. It was quiet, yes, too quiet at times, but it was mine. No one could take it from me anymore. I walked through the rooms, slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, as if reclaiming them piece by piece. Each corner whispered memories, both painful and sweet, but instead of breaking me, they grounded me. This was my place, my sanctuary, my proof that I had not been erased. There were moments of unexpected vindication, too. One morning, I stepped out to collect the mail and found Mrs. Allen, the former employee who had once whispered her secret to me. She handed me a small bouquet of daisies, her eyes shining. "For courage," she said simply. I held the flowers close, my throat tight, realizing that courage wasn't something you felt before the battle. It was something people saw in you after you refused to fall. The aftermath wasn't just about them losing, it was about me reclaiming. I began to speak more openly, to share my story not with shame, but with steady honesty. Neighbors who had once avoided me now listened, nodded, offered quiet support. I discovered that my voice carried further than I thought, that the truth, once spoken, could echo in places I never expected. My son didn't come to me right away. Weeks passed with silence between us, a chasm too wide to bridge. But one evening, he appeared on my doorstep, his face gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed. He didn't step inside. He just stood there, shifting from foot to foot like a boy again, not the man who had betrayed me. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I made a mistake." I wanted to throw my arms around him, to pull him close and tell him everything would be all right, but I couldn't. Not yet. The wound was still raw, the betrayal still sharp. I simply nodded, my voice steady. "Yes," I said quietly, "you did, and now you must live with it." His face crumpled, tears spilling, but he said nothing more. He turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched under a weight only he could carry. That was the true aftermath, not the legal battles, not the whispers, not the downfall of the mistress. It was the silence between me and my son, the knowledge that some scars cannot be erased, only endured. And yet, amid the ruins, there was light. I was no longer the woman left trembling in the cold outside a church. I was no longer the widow mocked at her husband's funeral. I had walked through humiliation, betrayal, isolation, and I had emerged still standing, bruised, scarred, but upright. And in a world that tried to bury me, that was victory enough. The seasons shifted quietly around me. Winter gave way to spring, and the house that had once felt suffocating began to breathe again. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the wooden floors. The silence, though still heavy at times, no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like space I could fill with my own voice, my own strength, my own beginning. I started small. I opened the old garden in the back, the one I had neglected for years while drowning in suspicion and grief. My hands dug into the soil, rough and unyielding. But with every seed I planted, I felt something take root in me as well. Hope renewal. A reminder that even after the harshest winter, life insists on returning. There were days when loneliness pressed down on me, when I longed to hear my son's footsteps in the hallway, his laughter echoing in the kitchen. Those were the hardest moments, the ones that cut deepest. But instead of collapsing, I lit a candle by the window, a silent sign that though I could not erase his betrayal, I would not close the door forever. If he chose one day to return, not to the woman he had mocked, but to the mother who had always loved him, I would be here, changed, scarred, but still his mother. The mistress faded from the town's whispers eventually. Though not in triumph, she slipped into obscurity, her reputation ruined, her ambitions crumbled into dust. People no longer spoke her name with envy or admiration, only with pity or contempt. That was her punishment, not a dramatic fall from grace, but a slow, humiliating disappearance into irrelevance. And me? I remained. That was the greatest revenge. I walked through the market with my head high. I attended church again, no longer with my shoulders hunched in shame, but with steady steps, my eyes meeting those around me. Some whispered, some stared, but many smiled, nodding with respect I had never expected. They saw not the widow broken at the funeral, but the woman who had stood when standing seemed impossible. I realized then that survival itself is a form of victory. They tried to erase me, to strip me of dignity, to bury me under their lies. But I endured. And in enduring, I reclaimed not just my husband's hidden legacy, but my own. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of crimson across the sky, I sat in the garden among the first blooms of spring. I thought of everything I had lost, everything I had fought, and everything I had regained. I thought of the letter that started it all, still tucked safely in my drawer. His shaky handwriting, both a confession and a plea. Protect our legacy. I had done more than protect it. I had rebuilt it. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dusk, not to my husband, not to my son, but to myself. You are enough. You always were. This story isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who has ever been silenced at her own table, every mother who has ever been mocked by the child she raised, every soul who has ever been told they are too weak to fight. If you are listening to my voice right now, if you are hearing my confession, I ask you this: what would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed silent for the sake of peace, or would you have dared to stand even knowing the cost? Because here is the truth I have learned. Peace without dignity is no peace at all. And silence in the face of betrayal is its own kind of death. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be erased. So I leave you with this, not as a warning, but as a promise. No matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how cruel the humiliation, there is always a way to rise. And when you do, the world will have no choice but to see you, to hear you, to remember you. If my story reached you today, if even a part of it made your heart burn with recognition, then don't let it end here. Tell me, what would you do if it were your son, your family, your dignity on the line? Would you walk away quietly, or would you, like me, choose to fight for your place in the story? I want to know. Leave your answer below, because every story shared is a candle in the dark, and together they light a path for those still stumbling in silence.